The clock on the wall showed 8:17 a.m., and for the first time in 7 years, Michael Carter knew he was about to lose everything. His shirt was still damp from the rain. His work badge hung crooked around his neck, and his old sedan was parked 3 blocks away because traffic had completely stopped. But Michael wasn't thinking about his job anymore. He was thinking about the pregnant woman sitting alone on the wet sidewalk, one hand gripping her stomach and the other trembling as she tried to reach for a phone that had fallen beneath a parked car. Michael had only seconds to decide. He could keep running toward the office and protect the job that paid his daughter's rent, groceries, and school expenses, or he could stop and help a stranger who clearly needed him. He stopped. Before we continue, if you believe kindness should never be punished and everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this one. Michael was a 38-year-old single father living in Columbus, Ohio, with his 9-year-old daughter, Grace. His life wasn't glamorous. He worked as a facilities assistant at a large technology company called Harrison Global, where he spent his days repairing doors, checking equipment, moving supplies, and solving small problems that most employees never noticed. He wasn't an executive, and nobody important knew his name, but Michael took pride in his work because every paycheck mattered. Since his wife had passed away several years earlier, he had learned to live with a painful truth. There was no one else to catch him if he fell. That morning had already gone wrong. Grace had woken up with a nightmare just before dawn, and Michael had stayed beside her until she finally fell asleep again. Then his car refused to start. After several attempts, the engine finally turned over, but the delay had already cost him 20 minutes. Michael drove toward the office through heavy morning traffic, repeatedly checking the clock, while worrying about the supervisor who had warned him that another late arrival could result in disciplinary action. Then, just 3 blocks from Harrison Global's headquarters, he saw her. A pregnant woman was sitting beside a bus stop in the rain. She looked pale and frightened. People passed her without stopping, some glancing briefly in her direction before continuing toward their own destinations. Michael pulled over immediately. He ran across the street and crouched beside her, asking if she was hurt. She explained that she had suddenly become dizzy and had fallen while trying to get out of a rideshare vehicle. Her phone had slipped beneath a parked car, and she couldn't stand without feeling faint. Michael looked at his watch. 8:03. He knew he should leave. He knew exactly what his supervisor would say. But he also knew that if he walked away and something happened to this woman, he would never forgive himself. He retrieved her phone, called emergency services, and stayed beside her until help arrived. When the ambulance finally pulled away, Michael looked at his watch again. 8:17. He sprinted toward Harrison Global. By the time he reached the building, his supervisor, Richard Hayes, was waiting near the employee entrance. Richard was known for his strict attitude and his complete lack of patience. Michael tried to explain what had happened, but Richard barely allowed him to finish. He told Michael that the company had rules, deadlines, and responsibilities. Michael pleaded for understanding, explaining that he had helped a pregnant woman who needed emergency assistance. Richard's response was cold. He said Michael should have thought about his own responsibilities before becoming involved in someone else's problems. Then he handed Michael an envelope. Termination paperwork. Michael stood frozen. For several seconds, he couldn't even breathe properly. Losing the job wasn't just losing a paycheck. It meant the possibility of missing rent. It meant Grace's school expenses becoming uncertain. It meant groceries, electricity, medicine, and every small part of their life suddenly becoming a question mark. Michael walked out of the building carrying the small box containing his belongings. He had worked there for 7 years, yet his entire career fit inside one cardboard box. When he reached his car, he sat behind the steering wheel and finally allowed himself to cry. He didn't know that someone had been watching everything. Across the street, the pregnant woman Michael had helped was sitting inside an ambulance waiting for transportation to a nearby hospital. Her name was Claire Bennett. She was 34 years old, and she wasn't simply a pregnant woman passing through the neighborhood. Claire Bennett was the founder, majority owner, and chairwoman of Harrison Global. She owned the company where Michael had just been fired. But Claire didn't reveal her identity immediately. She had been visiting one of the company's smaller offices that morning without the usual security detail. She had deliberately kept her visit private because she wanted to see how employees and managers treated ordinary people without knowing who was watching. What she had witnessed changed everything. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Claire and her unborn baby were safe, although she needed rest and observation. While lying in the hospital room, Claire kept thinking about the man who had stopped when everyone else walked past. She asked her assistant, Hannah Brooks, to find out who he was. Within an hour, Hannah returned with the information. Michael Carter, facilities assistant, single father, 7 years with Harrison Global, terminated that morning for being late. Claire stared at the report for a long time. Then she noticed something else. Michael's employment record was nearly perfect. 7 years with no serious disciplinary issues. Excellent performance reviews. Multiple recommendations from coworkers. He had even been recognized for helping employees during emergencies on 3 separate occasions. Claire's expression hardened. She asked Hannah to investigate exactly why he had been fired. The answer was simple. He had arrived 17 minutes late after helping her. Claire immediately called Richard Hayes. Richard confidently explained that Michael had violated company attendance policy. He insisted that rules existed for a reason and that making exceptions would create chaos. Claire listened silently. Then she asked one question. She wanted to know whether Richard would have made the same decision if he had known the person Michael stopped to help was the owner of Harrison Global. There was silence on the other end. Richard suddenly realized who Claire was. The following morning, Michael woke before Grace and sat at the kitchen table staring at his bank account. He had enough money to cover only a few weeks of expenses. Grace walked into the kitchen wearing her school uniform and noticed immediately that something was wrong. Michael smiled and told her he was simply tired. He didn't tell his daughter he had lost his job. He didn't want her carrying an adult's worries. After taking Grace to school, Michael began visiting businesses and submitting applications. By afternoon, he had already received 2 rejection emails. By evening, his shoulders were heavy with exhaustion. Then his phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Michael answered. A calm female voice asked him to come to Harrison Global headquarters the following morning. Michael almost refused. He thought perhaps the company needed additional paperwork. Instead, when he entered the building the next day, employees seemed unusually quiet. He was escorted to the top floor. The doors opened. Claire Bennett stood near the windows. Michael recognized her immediately. She was the woman from the bus stop. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire told Michael that she owed him more than an apology. She explained who she was and told him that he had been fired from a company he had unknowingly protected by choosing compassion over convenience. Michael looked stunned. He expected anger, perhaps embarrassment, but Claire's eyes were filled with something else. Gratitude. She told him that her baby was safe because he had stopped. Then she told him that she had reviewed his entire employment record. Michael had done his job faithfully for 7 years, but the company had failed him in one terrible moment. Claire reversed the termination immediately, but she didn't stop there. She dismissed Richard Hayes for violating the company's values and for failing to exercise reasonable judgment in an emergency situation. Then she offered Michael a new position as Employee Support and Safety Coordinator, a role created specifically to improve emergency response and employee welfare across the company. The salary was significantly higher. Michael couldn't believe it. But the moment that broke him emotionally came when Claire told him that she wanted Grace's education expenses covered through a company scholarship program for children of long-term employees. Michael lowered his head, overwhelmed. He had stopped that morning because helping someone felt more important than being on time. He never expected kindness to come back to him. Weeks later, Michael returned to work in his new position. But something had changed. Employees began approaching him with problems they had been afraid to report before. He listened. He helped. He made sure people knew that company rules mattered, but people mattered too. Claire's baby was born healthy several months later. When Michael received the photograph, he smiled for the first time in weeks. Claire later told him that the most important thing she had learned that rainy morning was not about leadership, business, or company policies. It was about character. Anyone can be kind when kindness is convenient. Real character appears when doing the right thing costs you something. Michael had lost his job because he stopped to help a stranger. But in the end, that stranger wasn't only the owner of the company. She became the person who reminded him that one difficult moment does not define your worth. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe for more stories about compassion, courage, and second chances. And before we end, I have one special request. Comment, kindness always wins. If you believe doing the right thing is worth it, even when nobody is watching. Michael never forgot that rainy morning in Columbus. Neither did Claire. Because sometimes, the greatest opportunities in life don't arrive when everything goes according to plan. Sometimes they begin with a delay. Sometimes they begin with a stranger. And sometimes, losing everything for a moment is exactly what leads you to something far greater.